Both Isaac and Jessica were born prematurely and spent the early weeks of their lives in neonatal care. So from the outset, I declare a deeply personal interest on the issue that I'm seeking to legislate on today. Mr. Speaker, originally myself and my wife understood that having children at all might be difficult, but in February 2015 we learnt much to our immense joy that we were expecting our first child. Because of a pre-existing medical condition, Rosalind was told that hers would be a complex, high-risk pregnancy and would have a higher chance in ending in stillbirth. In the early hours of the 26th of June 2015, our son Isaac was born prematurely at the Southern General Hospital in Glasgow. During an aborted labour which evolved to an emergency caesarean section, Isaac's heart rate plummeted. His blood sugars were incredibly low and he couldn't breathe without assistance. Within a few minutes of being born, he was whisked away from Rosalind and I and transferred to neonatal intensive care, where he spent the earliest part of his life in an incubator, hooked up to countless machines and wires. It was over a period of time and in that neonatal intensive care unit that Isaac received the amazing love, care and support from our National Health Service to stabilise his breathing, to allow his heart rate to recover and build up his blood sugars. It would be days before we could even hold him. Our only contact was to hold his tiny hands through the holes in the incubator. 3 years later, just last September, we went through all that again for the birth of Jessica. In Jessica's case, her hospital stay was even longer due to protracted breathing difficulties, which culminated in her spending the first 8 months of her life on oxygen. I still vividly remember watching her in the neonatal intensive care unit turning blue and having to be resuscitated by nurses. Mr. Speaker, I'm telling you all of this because, sadly, it is the norm, indeed the reality for many parents across the United Kingdom. Each year, around 100,000 babies are born premature or sick and will have an extended stay in neonatal care. And I know that I speak for every family on the neonatal unit when I say a heartfelt thank you to NHS staff for supporting our children and us as families through an incredibly distressing, uncertain and vulnerable time. And it's because of that stress, that uncertainty and that vulnerability that the current legislation is simply not fit for purpose. Existing UK employment legislation takes no account of the fact that some babies will spend much longer in hospital after being born, especially if they're born premature or sick. As a result, parents, and in particular dads, require extra paid parental leave, which the current arrangements do not cover. In the case of both my children's births, the period of my statutory paternity leave had run out by the time Isaac and Jessica were discharged from the neonatal unit. And sadly, that is the case for so many parents who face the brutal choice of having to return to work whilst their child is still in hospital. Indeed, research by the charity Bliss found that 2/3 of dads had to return to work whilst their baby was still receiving specialist neonatal care. And the government knows that there are major challenges for us, and that's why they commissioned a review into the barriers to the labour market for parents of premature and sick babies. Unfortunately, despite that review concluding, the government is still refusing to publish the details or take action, hence why I feel that I need to bring a bill via the private members route. One of the biggest problems is that for so many families there is an employee-employer lottery out there, a lottery that so many of us simply cannot afford to play. A number of employers in the public and private sector have gone above and beyond and made sure that employees can be with their family on the neonatal unit and still receive pay. One such example is Waltham Forest Council. Employees there are entitled to an extra week of leave for every week that their premature baby spends in hospital before their due date. In the private sector, another good example would be Sony Music. They too ensure that employees are entitled to full pay during the period in which a baby is born before full term. So, Mr. Speaker, that's great if you work for Waltham Forest Council or Sony Music, but the vast majority of us don't work for Sony or Waltham Forest. And that's why my proposed bill will ensure that families no longer face an employment rights lottery when they're heading into the neonatal unit. Across the world, other countries have already taken action to provide better rights and support for the parents of premature and sick babies. In Sweden, maternity leave commences at the point of discharge. In Ireland, maternity leave and pay is extended by the amount of time between birth and the original expected birth date. But here in the UK, we are seriously lacking behind, failing parents when they need us most.
Hear, hear.
Lawrence Quayle, a former retail worker, is just one of the parents who was left with no choice but to be signed off as sick after his son Leo arrived 15 weeks early. Lawrence said, "When I told my employer that my wife had gone into early labour, there was a dispute between my line manager who was supporting me and her manager about whether I could start my paternity leave early. I was dealing with HR when my son was just a few days old and needed me at his cot side." Eventually, I was given my paternity leave, but because Leo was in intensive care at a hospital 60 miles from home, I knew I'd need more time with him to support him and my wife. Things with Leo were very much touch and go, and there were a number of occasions when it looked like we could lose him. I was told I couldn't take any annual leave, and I could only take unpaid leave, which I simply could not afford. I ended up being signed off sick from work with stress for 2 months. The strain this put on my relationship with managers at my work meant that I chose to leave the company shortly afterwards. Now, Mr Speaker, Lawrence's story is a perfect illustration as to how current employment legislation simply fails families when they need our protection and support most. Yep. And so by allowing this bill to proceed today, we can right that wrong and truly tackle a burning injustice which can be so easily extinguished for the parents of all those future Isaacs and Jessicas who too will start their life in neonatal intensive care and therefore commend the bill to the House.
Yeah. Well, now, the question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes.